All right. Well, thanks for being flexible, everybody. Boy, you guys are troopers. Look at that. Everybody's still here. So this is me. I'm John. I run Dices Foundation. It's a 501c3. And then I also am a farmer and a beekeeper, as you heard. When I was a kid, I used to see commercials and Kenny Rogers was drinking orange juice. Does anybody remember this? Is anybody as old as I am in this audience? Florida's identity was citrus, right? But what a lot of people don't know is that over the last 20 years, Florida citrus is down by 96% in yields. It's completely collapsed, the industry has. This is Florida citrus now. They're crediting a virus, HLB virus, but so they're actually pumping, that can is an injection of antibiotics that they're putting into every tree to keep them alive. It was never a virus, right? It's always been the soil, has always been the problem there. And I was talking with one of the conventional producers, and he said, I'm gonna walk. I hope that's okay. Does that bother people? Does that bother people? Can you hear me? No. Oh, geez, I gotta use it. Sorry for oh, perfect. Oh, geez. Oh, God, that makes me nervous in so many ways. So I was talking with one of the conventional citrus producers, and he's like, I just feel like the tree's roots are kind of sick, right? The fibrous roots aren't on the trees anymore. And I explained to him that we had seen citrus orchards in Florida, and they were reversing the trajectory of their plants. They were bringing trees back into production. And one of the ways that they were doing that was by growing vegetation from trunk to trunk. And normally they look like this, right? They spray them out, so they're roasting their roots with herbicide. And he said, John, if that's true, then that flies in the face of everything as an industry that we are being told by our advisors, by the universities, by the Citrus Board. And I asked him, how's all that advice working? And he thought about it for a second, and he said, yeah, you're right, John. They're not looking out for us little guys. Planetary health is an interesting concept. What it says is that we have been, over the last decades, maybe centuries, we've become extremely good at promoting human health at the expense of environmental health. And what planetary health, this concept, says is that you can have both, right? We can improve human health while simultaneously improving the health of the entire planet. I like that. I like that concept, right? I think regenerative ag fits real nice in that concept. A central problem with agriculture is on this screen. It's not soybeans, it's how we grow soybeans. Agriculture has become far too simplified, okay? Simplified, what does that mean? It means we have gone into an environment and we have taken most of the plant diversity out of that environment and we've replaced it with a single species. And all of that life that used to do things on that farm has been eliminated. And all of the processes and all of the things that contributed to us, we have to replace with a jug. Right? And no matter what it says on the side of that jug, it can say regenerative on it. It can say organic on it. It's all meant to do one thing, and that is to replace what life does for free. Okay? Bear that in mind, please, as we go forward. So, we know what a central problem is, and some of those jugs have unforeseen consequences. How many in the room have heard of neonicotinoids? Have you guys heard? Wow, you guys are savvy. Look at that. So corn isn't pink, right? It's not grown that way. It's not blue. It's not purple. it's treated. Most of the corn seed in the United States is treated with an insecticide called neonicotinoid. It's got a number of other names in there, but if you see this, if you open your bag of corn or beans or wheat or alfalfa or sunflower, almost all field crop seeds, and if it's a color, it's because it's treated with an insecticide, probably a fungicide too. The problem with that is that each of these corn seeds, based on our calculations, can kill 164,000 bees. Extremely effective insecticides at killing non-target species, because only 3% of that insecticide actually gets into the corn plant, and it's meant to be taken up by that corn plant so that it defends itself against early season herbivory, right? But the reality is that with only 3% going into the corn plant, where's the other 97% going? And it's going into the water, and it's going into the soil, and it's getting picked up by other plants that we weren't expecting. One of my friends in Montana, she said, John, we've got problems with our deer. They've got underbites. The hunter-killed deer have underbites. And the males have weird genital deformities that we've never really seen before. And she was wondering whether neonicotinoids, this insecticide that's pervasive in our environment, it's on about 17% of the terrestrial land surface of our country. She was wondering maybe if that was affecting her deer population in Montana. And so Elise was my graduate student, together with a colleague at South Dakota State, a wildlife biologist. This was an extremely hard study to do. We administered imidacloprid, one of these neonicotinoids, to captive bred deer. And then we measured the performance of those deer over a number of years. The insecticide-treated deer, when we looked at their spleens, the insecticide-treated deer the dead ones had about twice the amount of insecticide in their spleens. Okay? The spleen was the magic organ. We looked at their brains, we looked at their milk, we looked at their blood, their liver, a number of other organs. Spleens seem to correlate extremely well with the performance of these animals. The amount of imidacloprid in the spleens of these deer was associated with reduced fawn body weight. They were smaller. Fawn organ weights, that makes sense. They were smaller. Thyroid hormone levels. How many people have hyperthyroidism in your family right now? Fawn jawbone length. They were slower. It's screwing up their hormones. It's making them slower. What's a slow deer in the wild? Dead deer, yeah. John, that's what you're able to do under laboratory conditions. You force-fed those deer that insecticide. We live in the real world, right? So North Dakota sent me a bunch of deer spleens from hunter-killed animals, and we measured the quantity of imidacloprid that was found in those. And it was about 3 times the amount that we were able to experimentally generate under controlled conditions. What are we doing? Wake up, right? Learning disabilities, autism, autoimmune diseases. Yeah. Time to wake up. There is a better way. Regenerative agriculture. Have you had this defined at this conference yet? I wasn't able to be here yesterday. Did you guys get the okay. So when regenerative folks kind of call in and they're like, all right, it's time to talk about regenerative, they bring out these buckets of principles, okay? Stop tilling the soil, stop uniform disturbance to the soil. Life, increasing plant diversity, never leaving bare soil, getting those living roots on the ground, as many as you can, okay? Integrating livestock onto crop ground, managing livestock, keeping them dense herds, moving them frequently, allowing it to rest, eliminating agrochemicals, synthetics, fertilizers, and pesticides. Those are the buckets, right? This is what we're always, as regenerative ag folks, you know, we haul this out every single time. And I visited about 1,300 regenerative farms at this point across North America, and I can tell you that there's a lot of farms that are checking these boxes, and they're going to get stamped regenerative, right? They're going to get labeled regenerative, but they can't do one thing. They don't connect humans with nature, with family, with community. And fundamentally, you are never going to attain what's possible in a regenerative farm unless you start here. This is where all of it starts. Regenerative agriculture makes all kinds of promises, all kinds of them. It's going to heal the climate. It's going to increase soil health. It's going to reverse desertification. More profit. We're going to reverse biodiversity losses. Reduce pollution. Resilient rural communities will return. Gosh, it just sounds all perfect, doesn't it? And you know, there's success stories in this. Many of you are these success stories. How many of you get dismissed? How many of you get swept aside? That'll work on your farm, but it'll never work on mine, right? It's too wet, too dry, too hot, too cold. I've heard it. I've heard it. That's where science can come into this. But we have to be doing this right, okay? The scientists, and this echoes back to the last presentation, need to connect. We need to be connected with the problems. Because you know what? There's a whole lot of global food policy and predictions that are being made right now on scientific data that they're swearing they are data people, and that's what they uphold. But the data isn't connected with the reality of the situation. And these armchair ecologists, we don't need more of them. We need people that get their boots on the ground and they get dirt under their fingernails. So we decided, I mean, this was my world, right? I worked for the USDA for a number of years, and I was good at this world of science, right? Nobody had better stats than I did. I mean, publications, grants, you know, I was advising the US government on various aspects of it, but I could drive from South Dakota to Minnesota where my folks lived, and things weren't getting better, right? Climates were changing, rural communities were disappearing, pollution was everywhere. And I had to ask myself, how's it working? And so I decided that the science that I was doing and the way that I was doing it was wrong, and so I quit. And I said the first thing that science needs to be doing is that the scientists need to be farmers, that they need to connect and feel these problems on a firsthand level. And that opened up a whole new world. The science that needs to be happening right now, if we're going to usher in a new evolution to our food system, it needs to be systems level, not component or compartmentalized. It needs to be farmer driven. You want to know why? Because scientists are not the experts on farming. Farmers are the experts on farming. Scientists were always meant to be servants, not leaders on this issue. All right? We can take what farmers are developing, and we can extend it, and we can transfer it, and we can help to understand some of it. But you guys are on the front lines, and you are the ones that are developing these systems, and we never should have supplanted you in that process. It needs to cross agro-eco regions, okay? So lots of different locations to really test the rigor of this, and it needs to reflect actual food systems, not experimental farms. That brings in the 1,000 Farms Initiative, which may or may not be the largest experiment ever conducted, but it's a big one. And we decided to test two general things. Does regenerative ag work no matter what you grow and where you grow it? Farmers are developing successful systems. How? How are they getting there? Can we experimentally or empirically tease out certain practices that seem to really be working to help new farmers that want to try this transition with minimal risk? It's been a busy few years. Our teams have deployed from the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, that little yellow or blue triangle there. That's my farm. And headquarters for Ecdysis Foundation. We've deployed scientific teams to each of those dots, about 1,300 of them over the last 3 years. It's really the first time that I think a scientific team has intimately experienced a nation's food system, where we've not just parachuted in, grabbed a particular data set and left, but we actually meet the farmers and we listen to them. And we experience their systems and all of the issues that they're facing. So lots of farms, lots of different areas, about 35 different food systems, well, cropping systems, depending on how you cut it, and then at least 5 livestock systems. We're not done yet. You see there's a big chunk down there that we still need to visit in the southeast and in Arizona and some of the desert areas to really give resilience to our perception of regenerative. Lots of different cropping systems, lots of livestock systems, testing whether or not this stuff works. Each of these dots on there represent, or they fall along a continuum, right? Regenerative ag isn't a one-size-fits-all situation, is it? Every time you adapt to a particular area, you have to change your practices. And so each of these farms ends up falling along a continuum. The conventional farms, the most conventional, they're tillage, bare soil, monocrop, synthetic chemicals up the yin-yang. On regenerative, they seem to be unified by no-till, plant diversity, organic amendments, and they drop these synthetics once they start their system really starts moving. So each farm receives a score of 1 to 8. In about 2 minutes, I can tell you where your farm sits along this continuum, and I can make predictions that are pretty accurate about what we're going to find out there. This system is free, and it's available for everybody. It's basically all of your regenerative stamps or whatever. We did it. We have millions of dollars worth of data that support it, and we're the only job in town that does that. So how about that? Yeah. I went out to this farm in northern Montana. Adam, you were there. And I was talking with the farmers about it, and one of his neighbors came by, and he's like, "What are you doing?" Because, I mean, we were in the middle of nowhere, Montana, and, like, there's a whole bunch of minivans that are parked outside of this field. That gets everybody's attention. And I'm like, I told him what we were doing, and he's like, "John, you convinced me. I'm ready to purchase your organic products." And I'm like, "Oh, no, we're not selling anything, right?" And he's like, "What? What? How many times have people come saying, 'Oh, I'm here to help. This is my list of products for you to buy,' right?" Yeah. He's like, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I got 3 kids at home. My daughter's sick. She has autoimmune diseases, and the antibiotics just don't work anymore." Right? It's time for us to make some changes. So what are we measuring on each of these dots? We're looking at the nutrition of the foods that are being produced, partnering with the PTFI and Ecdysis for the most comprehensive examination of nutrition of food that's ever been conducted. About 16,000 biochemicals we're quantifying in each yield product. And we can correlate that back to management and how many lady beetles are out there and how happy you are. We're looking at soils, chemistry, physical properties of the soil, down to 60 centimeters. We stratify that all the way down. Water. But what really sets this apart is that we're looking at life. I was on an Amish farm in upstate New York, And I started listing all of this stuff off for him. We were sitting in his alfalfa field, and I'm like, yeah, we're going to quantify the amount of carbon in your soils. And he's like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. And we'll look at the soil chemical and physical properties, right? And how water is interacting with all of your soils. And he's like, okay. And then we're going to name all of the bacteria and fungi in your soil. His eyes got a little brighter. And we're going to tell you all the names of the bugs that we're finding out there. His eyes got a little brighter yet. And the plants and the birds and the ecoacoustics. And I asked him afterwards why that biodiversity seemed to resonate with him. And he said, you know, according to our faith, farmers, humans, are stewards of life. And of all the scientists that we've had visiting our place, they haven't been telling us about that. And so this is really one of the first times that that's happened for us, and that's pretty exciting. We're quantifying biodiversity on a scale that's never happened before. We're developing new technology in order to do it. We're also looking at the economics and management and the social and physical and mental wellness of the farmers. Results. This is the exciting part, right? We've spent oh my God, so much work amassing a data set that's a little staggering. So this first paper is just one carving out of that major data set. It's focused on row crops, which is essentially corn, wheat, soybeans, and all of that kind of stuff. It's what we were able to gather up early on in this study. And it's from these first 2 years of the study. Okay, let's start with carbon. All right? We love carbon, don't we? Carbon, oh, money, 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 right? Ooh, give me some of that carbon. Isn't that good stuff? We love this. So carbon's important, right? Carbon is stored. This is the way that the planet has been storing carbon and regulating greenhouse gas emissions for like millennia, right? Like millions and millions of years. It's been soil, at least partially. And there's a lot of carbon that's in that soil. This is actually data from our study. About 6.43 gigatons of carbon is in the soils of row crops, all right? Of all of the greenhouse gas emissions, all of that carbon dioxide that's going up into the atmosphere, agriculture is responsible for at least 11% of that. That's a pretty good chunk. It's a pretty good chunk. So we produce about 6 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. Bear with me, folks. Bear with me. All right? So this is enough to know for right this second. We could dig, oh gosh, you get people talking about this and it gets real thick real quick. This is what we found on the most regenerative farms. The total carbon pools that are stored in row crop soils are significantly greater. There is so much carbon that is stored in the fully regenerative that if we were to devote all of the row crops, and just the row crops, to fully regenerative practices, it would store twice the annual emissions that we have in this country. That is a real solution. That is the best solution that has been proposed so far. It's a hell of a lot better than putting in a pipeline and shipping carbon. That gets you about 1 gigaton. Ag could get us 12. But what's so fascinating about this data too is look at that lower bar. Each of those colors is a different strata. So when we took that soil probe and we shoved it down into the ground, we found that there was different strata, right? And at the top, that's normally very fragile carbon. You know, if somebody comes in and starts to, till that up, it spews it back into the atmosphere. What we're finding is that the roots and the processes end up changing carbon at a much deeper level than we ever realized. Am I running out of time?
Sorry to interrupt. There are 2 cars that are blocking some folks who need to get to the airport. They are one is a New Mexico plate, PWZ 580. I don't know which kind of car. The other is
we'll all close our eyes while you would get up.
The other is a rental car, a silver Kia sedan with Colorado plates, license plate number BNZR66. I think that the New Mexico is a truck. If those sound like your vehicles, could you please go move them because folks are trying to leave and they cannot exit. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem at all. That is fine. All right, where were we? Carbon. Regenerative ag is a big part of the carbon solution. There are questions about that data, though. How fast does this happen, right? How fast can we pull that carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back down into the ground? What are the emissions, right? Do regenerative croplands end up emitting more carbon or less carbon than these conventional ones? We know how that turns out. It's a good deal. And then what about other food systems? I could tell you right now, a preliminary look at the data suggests that row crops, I mean, honestly, if the best scenario for carbon sequestration or storage in row crops is equivalent to about the worst management practices in horticultural perennial crops and livestock systems. And so if we really wanted to get serious about using our food system for mitigating some of these planetary scale climate problems, we'd reconsider row crops pretty quick. Biodiversity. We are currently living through the worst mass extinction event that the planet has ever experienced. This is worse than when the dinosaurs went extinct, okay? In 40 years, most of life on Earth will be gone. The majority of life on Earth, more than 50%. It's not just the bees, we're changing entire habitats, right? Insects are dying off. It's the insect apocalypse. Birds, bats, bees, you name it. Regenerative agriculture, for every biological group that we studied, had substantially higher biodiversity. All of these microbial groups, all of the invertebrate groups, look at that bar on the plants up there, that orange one. Holy moly, I had to cut it off in the middle of it because it was so long. That's a good thing, okay? And what we've discovered is that that life scales with how much carbon is in the soil. And so when farmers ask me, what can I do to increase carbon? It's not buy a biochar reactor, okay? It is grow life on your farm, and the carbon will take care of itself. That is who we are as humans. We are stewards of life. And regenerative ag is a celebration of life. At its heart, that is what it is. Nutrition is really confusing. Some of the nutrients in food goes up, some of it goes down. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Nutritionists don't know either yet. And so we're kind of in this weird state where we can start generating the data, but in order to, on a fundamental level, do we know? Of course we do, right? When we're eating nutritious food, we can feel it, right? But it's turning that into a number becomes a really challenging thing for us right now. Economics. You do not lose your butt by going regenerative. You do sacrifice some of your row crops' yield potential by the looks of it. But what was interesting about our data was that this dot right over here above the 6, that's a regenerative field. That's one of the most profitable corn farms, right? Why are some of these farms, these regenerative farms, in almost every system that we studied, they are the most productive? Why is that? I was in North Carolina blueberry field, or on a regenerative farm out there, and it was hot. I was tired. I'd been digging probes all day with the staff, and the old gentleman, it was a U-pick operation, and it was closed, and it was still loaded with families, right, that were all out there picking with their kids and stuff. And the old farmer was sitting on the porch in his rocking chair, and I went and I sat down by him, and he's like, "John, want to tell you something. So I leaned a little closer. He's like, it's not about the money. Take care of people, and the money will come. I think those words are true in regenerative ag. I think that they are prioritizing other things. When we ask farmers, conventional farmers, what are your motivations for management decisions? They are disproportionately, over regenerative, focused on finances, yields. Regenerative farms are focused on soil health and the mental and physical wellness of their families. Those are strong motivators for them. There's different currencies out there. And yes, you have to make money. We understand that. But the greed that has crept into our systems right now. You know who some of the most miserable farmers that we met across the country are? Row crop farmers. They're trapped. Absolutely trapped. One of the metrics of success of farming is, I bought the quarter next to me, right? And their grandpa and their dads were really good at that. And now they're stuck with like 1,500 to 2,500 acres. And it's like, what do you do with that? How do you farm that? And row crops has become the only answer for them. And they're locked in with debt like you wouldn't believe. And there's no escape in sight for them. That's a hard one to change, to walk away from our metrics of success. Okay, this one will get people's attention. And I'm almost done. I'm sorry. Okay. We asked the farmers, this is just croppers, okay? We asked the farmers if you or your family have any of these issues. Asthma, a lot of these, basically autoimmune issues, right? And these are the stats on it. About half of them have allergies, about a quarter of them have depression, 32% have anxiety. Then we looked at the national averages of all humanity in the United States. Our croppers aren't doing so well. And then we asked them about Parkinson's disease. And we asked them about cancer. We're killing our farmers. We're killing them. And I've been apologizing for it for too damn long, and I can't do it anymore. This isn't okay. For corporate greed, we are killing our farmers. It's time for a change. We're in Maine. So I'm a data guy, right? And I thought that data was going to be the most important thing that we produced as part of this study. And it is important, but it's not the most important. We met this couple, they're in their 80s, and they've been fighting their entire lives. They told the staff how inspired they were when they drove in to meet our staff of these goofy scientists, right? And they'd been fighting. Their entire lives, they'd been fighting, trying to support small wild blueberry farmers in Maine against this swell of industrialization that was going to crush their communities. And they're at the end, and they're looking around themselves, and they're like, does anybody care? Was it worth something? And then in drives this caravan of 3 crappy old minivans, and it spills out these enthusiastic young scientists that think that this is the coolest damn farm that they've ever seen. And I didn't understand how important it was for them just to feel seen and heard. And we don't know, what we're going to find on that farm, right? But when we leave, that's the whole point of doing the science. But when we leave, that farmer knows that we care about them, and we care about their farm, and we care about their family. And that's a much different style of science than the one that's informing global food policies right now. And a lot of the data that surrounds regenerative ag says that what these farmers are doing it can't happen, that it doesn't work. But I've been to these farms, and I've felt it. With all of my senses, I felt these farms. And now I have to take that, and I have to somehow turn that into a number, right? To convince other people that this is real, that the reality that my spirit is feeling. That is such a responsibility as a scientist right now, and I don't know if I'm enough for that. I hope I am. I hope I get this right. But one of the things that I have learned I wish I knew it a long time ago, is that, one of the most important tools that a scientist has for measuring the reality of the world is their heart. And that ain't something you learn in grad school. There we are. Many people have made this happen. We give all of the information away free to the farmers. If you would like your farm to participate, please scan that QR code. I've probably gone way over time, and I apologize for that and for disrupting your afternoon, but thank you very much for listening.
We have time for questions. Yeah. So thank you so much, Jonathan, both for your talk and just for all your work. It's really meaningful, and all the heart you put into it. I think that I know I'm feeling it. I think we do have time for a few questions. So who would like to kick us off? Right, I'm gonna go up here.
Jonathan, thanks so much for all your research and all your work. I'm wondering if you've heard of or been a part of any conversations that would attack maybe the elephant in the room when it comes to public health in mandating labeled products that have been treated with atrazine or glyphosate or grown on those areas. We've done it with cigarettes, we've done it with GMOs. Would that be another way of perhaps raising the floor as opposed to raising the bar with all these certification stickers of attacking, I guess, the problem at hand?
Oh, hello. So what you're saying is maybe we could use a carrot and a stick in this situation and maybe start looking at some of those synthetics. I have thought about that a lot, and much of my career with USDA was bent on regulating pesticides and genetically modified organisms. So I think that that's a part of the solution. Yes.
Wait, hold on.
Should I just repeat, or do you want to just, yeah. All right.
Sometimes I still see seeds with those coatings, and when you see them, or like they come in a package or something, and you don't know until you open it, what do you do? What's the best way to dispose of them?
How do you dispose of some of these treated seeds? I'd burn them. But I don't know. That's a great question. Yeah.
I work in the arena with regenerative farmers and land producers, and I'm really concerned about the co-opting of the word. I'm hesitant to use it.
Me too.
I'm seeing it used in relation to Roundup ready crops that they're just not tilling.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, so there's a very good chance that by the time we save our place on the planet using our food system, we ain't gonna call it regenerative ag anymore. I think it's more about the system, right? It's about adhering to the principles, especially those fundamental ones where we are connecting with the natural world and our families and our community. It's about knowing our farmers. It's about growing food ourselves. There's a cultural shift that has to happen here. And a lot of that just involves humans remembering what it's like to be human again. And that ain't something that can be labeled. So I don't know. I mean, I use the term regenerative right now. I know what it means. I always define what it means.
Got a little cluster here. I'm just going to look around to see. I'm going to go over here and I'll come back.
Okay, so I'm a wildlife biologist that grew up on a cow-calf operation.
Okay.
And I just really resonated with what you were saying when you were working with the USDA. So there was a lot of people in my cohort that also grew up on farms, and I'm one of the few that's actually working on a farm, and I had no intention of doing that at all, because we were really pushed towards, like, if you want to be a scientist and make a difference, you need to go work with the extension or with the feds or a non-GO. I guess I'm a lot more passionate about it since we're feeding like our small communities and I'm seeing the wildlife difference we're making. But what do you think like the big next step to like push our young scientists back to the farm or to realize that they can make a scientific impact on them would be?
Jeez Louise, that's a hard question, right? You know, I mean, with us, we're bringing in folks from all over the country, sometimes all over the world, to kind of train them in this other style of science where it is very connecting. And I think the new generation is sensing this on a level that I think prior generations really didn't, where they want to do something. They want, you know, they don't just want to talk about it. There's been too much of that. And so there's a real push for getting young farmers back on the ground. And yes, some of them are going to be scientists and some of them are going to have that mindset. Most of the scientists that I hire are not agronomists. I usually hire wildlife biologists because they resonate better with this whole approach of applied ecology. I don't know if that answered your question, but I blathered for a good long time.
So you've been out there to all these farms, and I'm just so curious, like how these like conventional farmers and their families react to the very like stark reality of the data that you pull about their health.
Yeah. A lot of the farmers, it's been really interesting how often some of the conventional farmers feed their families organic. They don't feed their families the stuff that they're producing. Maybe that's a step along this trajectory. I mean, it's morally and ethically very questionable, but at the same time, it's like, they're obviously woke to this. Maybe it's not the men in the family, maybe it's the women that are really important in this whole thing. I think it is, oftentimes. How do they resonate? You know, I think more and more of them are understanding, okay? They get it, that this isn't, they don't know what an alternative is sometimes. And I think that, you know, ignorance was a really nice excuse for a long time, but it sure feels less and less like that's a good explanation for this. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see. One of the harder parts of the study is that, I mean, when we study transitions, we revisit the same farm annually, and then we revisit the controls annually for 3 to 5 years. And keeping those controls is actually a real challenge because they end up changing their management or they go broke.
Hi. So I'm struck by a lot of the problems that you're identifying have been born out of technological solutions that have come to agriculture or scientific solutions that have come to agriculture. And I'm wondering about, especially given the talk prior to yours, I know that there's a role of data and data collection and it's important, but at what point do we, at what point are we reflexive about how much data do we need to continue to collect when we know what we really need to be doing is the restoration of relationships and occasionally checking up on that and how that's going. But I worry that there's so much energy going into science and data collection that we could also move more into relationship reconnection.
Yeah, I think that that's a really central part of what we're doing for sure. You know, like I said, I go into a regenerative farm and I can tell the staff even. I mean, okay, I won't tell them we're on a regenerative farm, right? But I can listen to their laughter, and it's more on a regenerative farm, and they get more done. And it's like, if I had them spit in a cup, I'll bet their cortisol levels would be lower on those regenerative farms. There's a physiological response as well. I go out there and I see the reflectance. I mean, all of our senses, right? I hear the rustling of leaves or the birds chirping or the crickets, and I can feel things bouncing off of my skin, and I can smell the volatile compounds, and all of my senses are taking in all of this information, and it's going into my brain simultaneously, and it says, you're happy. And I have to turn all of that into a number somehow, because not everybody that are making decisions, the philanthropic world, the policymakers, the scientific community, the media, God, all I would have to do is bring these people out so that they could feel what I have felt. But I don't get to do that. And what convinces them is a number. And so that's what I end up giving them, right? But I also have to know that I'm experiencing it myself too. And so, yeah, I think science has a role. I think experience would function so much better. But we're communicating to different audiences.
We have one question from our virtual audience, which I'm going to interpret a little bit because I think it's a good follow-on question to what you just talked about. The question is, it seems like historical range scientists made huge changes on range with observational science, and now research has to have a p-value or it can't be written about or shared. Yeah. And do you think that there will be a return to observational science over statistical relevance in academia? And I guess the part that I would like to add is either what are you doing or what are you observing other scientists doing to help validate the type of data that you were just describing?
We are fairly unique. There are good scientists. The scientific institution is disconnected at this point. And until that fixes itself, observational science isn't how you get an NSF grant. And as we've capitalized science, monetized science, that's a real critical crux of this whole thing. If I was selling something, I would tell all of you, don't trust me, okay? I mean, and I wouldn't be trying to disrupt this whole thing, right? But if I've got an ulterior motive, then yeah, free science is what it was always meant to be. There was always meant to be an independent third-party verifier. The land-grant university system was a great idea. It was a great idea. And they lost their sense of mission a while ago. And I'm sorry, there's good people in there. But as an institution, boy, it's struggling right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
We got one. This will be our closing question.
Yeah, my name's Augustus Epler. I'm 11 years old. I help my grandpa Casey Epler farm, and my question is, how can we get away with all these GMO and companies advertising? How do we help the farmers get rid of these GMOs that are in it, and just because they keep advertising it to us and we're basically forced to buy it?
Yeah, that's a bad situation, isn't it? I think that it comes down to, communities rebuilding, right? And people working together and saving seeds that are adapted for your farm so that you don't have to buy what the co-op says that is the necessary thing. It requires neighbors working together again. That's a big part of it.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us. Sorry you have to take off early, but thank you so much. I hope that you have another 50 to 100 farms signed up as a result.